Hi everyone, it's Ashley and Christine from Winding Rainbows, and we came to you today to show you some binding case tips that can be applied to any of our patterns.
Okay, so we have the outside of your case completed. The inside pockets are attached per your pattern instruction. And then I've got the two binding strips sewn together at the angle, which is the method I prefer to use. And I just wanted to show you a little bit of the placement because it's important in the final outcome. In some of my patterns, it's instructed to cut your outer spine on the other side from this, so one of your pieces may be shorter than the other. This one is both the same size, but for example, if you had a long and a short side, you want to start with your long side down here. But I like to loosely bring it around and position it so that I know exactly where things are going to land, because you don't want a seam next to a corner because it'll be bulky. And then I like to end my binding right here, and this keeps the beginning on the back so it's not on the front, which it doesn't, everyone has their own way of doing it, and if you have your way, that's fine, but this is what seems to work best for me. So I just kind of wanted to show you how I do the layout. So I have your raw edges outside, obviously, and I place it about here, and then I loosely just kind of pretend where it's going to go. And then here at the bottom, you want to make sure, like your spine center here, I line up on a line because that's the center of your case, and you want to make sure you have 2.5 inches that's going to go on this side of the line. And we've got over 3 there, so that side is good. And then I come back here and line this up loosely how it's going to be after you're sewn around. And then this end, I stop between your pocket binding and the center of your case. I like to stop right in the center, and that's where it's gonna, your sewing will stop. And that way, again, the joins are going to be on the underside and not on the front of your case. But I can show you how I join my ends when we get to that point, which everyone, again, has their own method. And I know a binding tool is not always necessary for everyone, but that's how I learned, so that's what I continue to use, and maybe it will be helpful to someone else that's beginning. So anyway, this all looks good, but again, if you were using a long and a shorter piece for your two binding strips, you might not have as much to work with down here, so you might have to adjust it a little bit. But the important thing here is just to make sure you have 2.5 inches past your center spine. So then when I get it about where I want it, I just take a binding clip, and I usually start in about 2 inches to begin sewing to my corner, because you want to make sure you leave, you know, a good space in between your start and stop points so that you have room to join your bindings and it's not tight to try to do that. So I'm going to take this over to the machine and show you how I do my corners. And this is our first video, so give us a little grace here. We're learning what we're doing. But I just kind of wanted to show you how I do my corners and such, which, yeah, but anyway, I start just a couple inches in, and again, it depends on, you know, which case you're doing or how wide it is, but generally 2 inches will work okay. And I can give you one tip. If you happen to have a Janome machine that has this wide built-in walking foot, you can line up, because I know people have a lot of trouble with trying to figure out how to sew the first side down and flip it and sew that side down and have it land on the binding. And my best advice to you is, again, if you happen to have this large foot, you can line it right here, the edge of your binding right in this crevice, and that will give you the perfect seam allowance. But if you don't happen to have a Janome built-in wide foot like that, you can find a spot on any machine on your foot. I didn't always have this nice of a machine. I started out on a $100 machine, and it just took a few times of practice to find exactly where it needed to lay. And my seam allowance is approximately 3/8 of an inch. If you take a ruler and measure, it's just inside of 3/8 of an inch is how I do mine. So if you could find something on your machine that gives you that 3/8 area, and just keep the edge of your binding lined up somewhere on your foot, it just works good and it keeps everything straight. Yeah, and then I'll show you the other when we get to that. But if you do have a needle down, I suggest using that, and if you don't, you can use your manual crank, but it's always best to keep the needle down. You don't really need to back stitch at the beginning because you're going to come over it at the end, but I come down to the end and I stop approximately my seam allowance, which in my case is 3/8 of an inch. And I've done so many. I used to measure, but I don't do that anymore because I've done enough that I know kind of where to stop. But go, and then I do back stitch a little bit. And if you happen to go too far, which I think I did here, I tried to so that I could show you this. But see how your binding is way below the edge of your case? You don't want that. You want these two to be lined up. So I just notch out a stitch or two, whatever you need, which I think I'm going to take one more there. And when you fold that back, your binding edge will be lined up with your case edge. Okay, and then I just bring it back up like this, line up the side, line up your top, and then I like to take a binding clip and just clip that so everything stays where I want it. I don't bind all the way around. I don't use binding clips all the way around the outside like some people do, because I find it is constricting when I'm trying to maneuver the binding. And then on this side, again, if you can find your place where you like to line up, which for me is right here. Again, it's about 3/8 of an inch. And on this particular foot, the top of my binding, I line up kind of in this hole. And again, I used to manually measure everything. But once you figure out what works for you, then you don't have to do all that. But this is what works best for me. So again, needle down. I take a couple stitches. I do like to back stitch. And then make sure that your seam allowance, your stitch length is at about 3.0. Mine was not, so I just fixed it. Otherwise it'll try to bunch up on you and you want it to flow smoothly. And then just keep that edge lined up with wherever you're finding that lines up well for you. And then on your ties, if you're using ties like it's instructed in my patterns, the way I do them, you want to make sure it's flat and underneath your binding strip and laying good and flat. And then just go right over the top of it. Keep coming down to your corner. Again, stopping whatever seam allowance you're using. Width from the end of the edge of your case, sorry, and back stitch again. And fold it back and check your alignment. And I went over just a little bit again, so I need to notch off one little stitch, and that should bring me back even. Okay, that's even, so then I'm going to fold again, lining up this side and your top, binding clip, and then continue this corner around your other two corners, and then I'll come back and show you how I finish. Okay, and when you get to your last corner, you're going to want to only stitch in a couple inches, the same as you did when you started. 2 inches in. So just stitch in about 2 inches or whatever you did on your other side. And stop and back stitch a couple. And then rid of my clips. And then this is kind of the important part, or this is how I like to do it. I know there's a lot of binding tutorials and a lot of methods, and everyone might have their own way of doing it, and that's okay and that's great, but this is how I do it, so I just wanted to show you. Again, I like to stop halfway between your pocket binding and your center of your case, and so I will cut there, but first I want to check one more time and be sure that I've got 2.5 inches between here. You know, between here and here is what I'm trying to say. And I've got plenty, so I'm gonna go ahead and cut that. And I learned from Missouri Star, which I've linked their tutorial a couple times in my patterns. This Fons and Porter binding tool is how I learned. And again, I know it's not necessary. Some people just cut off their binding strip and use that width to do their joining, but this is how I learned, and for some reason my binding just comes out a lot better when I do use this. So I'll just quickly show you how that is done. So you want this arrow on the ruler to line up the bottom of your binding and the edge of your tool at the edge of where you cut your binding off to make that a square, and then you lay this over. And I like to pull on it just a little bit because I'll show you shortly. And this is your 2.5 line, which is marked underneath my finger. There and there, and you can use it for other binding widths as well if you choose 2 1/4 or whatever on another item. But sorry, let me get this zipper out of the way here. This is just a personal preference, but I lay mine up there on top of my binding, even here, and then I lay this to make sure that it is where I want it. And if you can see, this is just a little bit below the actual 2.5 inch line. And I do that on purpose so that you don't get any bunching when you sew in the end. So then you can go ahead and cut that off. And then and this part was a little tricky in the beginning. I won't tell you how many times I had to redo it because I couldn't get the turn right, but the left side, right side up, facing like that, and then this side, flatten it out like this, and then turn it. Let me move this so I can show you better, because you're going to want to come in, and it can be a little tricky. I had to undo this numerous times when I started, so if you don't get it right the first time, don't get discouraged. Just like everything else, with practice you'll figure it out quickly. And another nice thing with the cases is you can, fold the case up like this so you have some room to work. So I just line up my corners. I stick a couple clips there, and then I shut the case. Bring this down in front of me. Lining up your edge there again. and then I make a small mark. And we like to use Sew Line is our favorite marking tool because it does go away with air shortly. And then just until I get the other side straight, I do clip this edge. And then, sorry, for some reason Ashley's foot doesn't seem to go up as high as mine does. We have the same machine, so it's a little awkward for me here, but, and then on the other side you'll do the same. Just find your corner, which you can see there, and mark a little line, and then unclip this. Just take the edge of your binding tool, draw it straight, not crooked, and then I clip that, and I clip this side to be sure that it stays lined up well. You want that line to match right at that corner. Bring it back underneath your foot and sew across the line. I do bring my seam allowance back to, we stitch with 2.2, but whatever you stitch normally with, so that the seam is nice and tight for you, and just sew across the line. And then you can remove your clips. I like to trim off my threads. And then before you cut anything, you'll want to open up your case and make sure that it's laying flat. And this one is just right. If you got too much leeway here, when you go to sew this, it's gonna bag together. And if it's too tight, it might scrunch like this. But for the most part, if you get it pretty close, it'll smooth itself out. So then when I know it's how I want it, then I just, you can measure this if you choose to, but you're just gonna trim about 1/4 inch from your stitch line. And then I just finger press this open. Open your case back up and line up the edges of your binding on the bottom and just kind of finger press it in place. And it'll lay pretty good for you that way. And then just line up your edge, turn it, and again here I kind of fold the case up. Start back over somewhere where you started with your needle down and finish sewing across. And don't forget to lengthen your stitch back to 3.0. Otherwise it will want to bunch on you. I just go and stop every couple inches to make sure everything still stays really lined up and even. And obviously you want your zipper pull out of the way so it doesn't catch on your foot. And just take it kind of slow, and if you go somewhat slow over the zipper, I have never had any needles break while I'm doing binding. And then just keep going until, and one thing I did want to also say when you're doing this, around any of the edges, if this vinyl or fabric, whatever the case may be, on the inside feels like it's wanting to bunch up on you, I just use my hand and press and just kind of push it out towards the edge, and that will really help it lay flat, which I do that all the way around just because it's habit now. But if you just kind of press out as you're going, it'll keep your inside laying down nicely. And then just go until you go over. And I think that my thread just broke, Ashley. Okay, sorry about that. Ashley's machines, even though we have the same machine, it's a little bit different than mine, but okay. So now I wanted to show you just briefly how I do the corners on these. I didn't used to do this, but I have found that it is helpful in the bulk. I'm sorry, I'm trying to stay back out of the camera and still see what I'm doing at the same time. But I try to slide my scissor just underneath of that vinyl and clip that corner off. I don't know if you saw that, but I'm sorry, it might take a little bit, but I'm trying to like take my time and actually show you without speeding things up. But I'm basically just trying to round the corner a little bit. That's what I'm doing. And Ashley's scissors are apparently not quite as sharp as mine are. So anyhow, just round that off, but you don't take too much because then you'll get a baggy corner. So just trim a little bit. And then I pull the corner just a hair. And I know you can do this all at once, but sometimes if I get in a hurry and do that, then too much comes off. So that's kind of what you end up with, is just a little bit of a rounded corner. And I do that on all 4 corners. And then I also like to just clean up any of my edges. Again, Ashley's scissors are a little bit duller than mine, so. But anyhow, you get the idea. Just go along there and clean all that up so that everything's nice and straight. And if you happen to have any big pieces of vinyl hanging out or anything, you can just clip them off. Okay, so got all the edges sewn down, all your corners trimmed, your edges cleaned up, and then you're just going to finger press your binding back away from the inside of the case on all the edges. And then this is awkward, sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to do this so she can get it on camera. Just fold a corner under, and I don't clip anything at this point. I just get my corners turned in kind of where I want them. And then you'll want to make sure that your ties get pushed out. And then this is just personal preference how I do this so that it's not sticking when I'm sewing, as I lay a piece of vinyl over a piece of tissue, sorry, over the vinyl on both sides. And then if it's awkward for you, you could just put a little piece of tape, you know, wherever to hold it in place. But I've done it enough times that I don't need to do that anymore. I just grab it and flip it. And then on this side, anywhere there's loose threads from your stitching your binding down, I like to get rid of those. So that when you sew your binding down, you don't have stray threads showing underneath or showing through. Which normally I do that before I put the tissue because now my tissue's messed up, but I just like to get rid of anything that could peek out from under the binding and look bad. Okay, so now we'll go back to what I was doing before. Try to fix my and then actually this is turned, sorry. I always like to start with the back of my case up here at the top because then your stitching line again is going to be on the back of your case and not showing on the front. But if you look here, you want to pull that over so it's just barely comes over. This is your stitch line from sewing your binding down on the other side. You just want to pull that a little bit over and then sew next to the edge. If you get like this and too far, then this is going to show and it's going to look sloppy on the other side. And I don't have any huge excess here to, well, this is a little big, but see if you come over too far and you got your binding this way too far, then it's also going to look sloppy on the other side. If you just barely cover that stitch line and sew right there, it should fall on the binding on the other side. So we'll try it here and see. Just hold it in place as best I can until I get my needle down. And I do back stitch a couple stitches and then just keep going and just take your time, go slow. Go a few inches and pull. Again, I don't clip anything because I like to be able to move stuff where I want it. So just barely pull that over your previous stitch line and sew. Top stitch it down. And if you happen to, because I see my tissue's all messed up now from me messing around. If you happen to sew over the tissue, it's not a big deal. You can just pull it out, and if necessary, you can use tweezers to pick out the little pieces. It's not a big deal. And some people do use a Teflon foot, I was going to mention, instead of the tissue over the vinyl like I do. But the Teflon foot on this machine did not work well for me at all. So I find it just easier to use the tissue. But you could check on a Teflon foot for your machine and see if it's something that you like. But again, just take your time. Go a little bit and get it where you want it, and then keep stitching, adjust, and keep stitching. We did quilt these cases, so it's feeling a little different to me than what I'm used to. And then when you get to your corner, I like to just get it where I want it. I tug this just a little bit, fold and bring it up. And on these, I will say, if you've bought in a case from me, you might see that as quilters, we all love that perfect mitered corner. But on these cases, I intentionally square this off just a little bit. And I do that so that I know that's going to stay secure and not come undone. It just gives me peace of mind to know my corners are going to stay where I want them. But if you can get the perfect mitered corner and confident in what you're doing, that's fine too. But this is just how I prefer to do it so that I know it's going to stay there. But I just bring that in a little bit. And then you can use a stiletto or a sharp scissor point, whatever you choose when you get to the corner to hold that down. I just usually use my scissors, but I really don't recommend doing that because if you hit your needle on your scissor, it will break your needle. But that's what I do, so. And then I just barely go over, and then when I turn, I like to see how this all looks. And it really looks pretty good, but one thing I can suggest that you do, which I normally do most always, is turn this just like a slight clock hair and stitch in one or two and then bring it back straight, and that'll keep your stitches on the outside of your binding and it won't come across the corner of your vinyl. If you just, again, just turn your case a little bit, come in a couple stitches, and then straighten back up. That's how I get that from not straying onto the vinyl or whatever your corner is. And then just continue the same. And then when you get down, let me keep going here. When you get down to where your tie is laying, and again, this is personal preference for me. I like to do it this way so that my tie is actually stitched down on the other side and it stays out of the way. But you don't have to do this. This is just, again, personal preference and how I choose to do it. It just keeps it laying flat. But when you get to it, you just pull out on it so that it's nice and flat on the other side. Because when I first started, several times I didn't pay attention to this and it was bunched up underneath and I had to tear it all out. So it's just a little tip. And then you'll just keep going in the same manner. Stop before you get to that corner and pull it tight. Tug a little bit. And fold it over. And if it's too much, you can always readjust. But again, I purposely square my corner just a little bit so that I know the stitches all catch well. And again, I'm going to turn just a hair, stitch in, and then I usually move my tissue at this point as well and face it the other direction. So the closer you keep it to this outside edge, the less it's going to try to stick on the other side. then the rest is pretty much the same. Just keep going. Just go a little bit, readjust your pullover. And it can get a little tricky where you've joined your binding. But again, if it's not perfect, it's not the end of the world. We all make mistakes, and I always try to tell my customers that get frustrated with the binding part, just keep doing it, because just finishing something is a very accomplishing feeling, and each time you make one, it'll get easier, because my binding is on the cases has not always been perfect, trust me. This is feeling really bulky, so if you feel bulk, just move your zipper back a little bit. I need to put my tissue back under. This might not be as perfect as always because I'm trying to stay back out of the camera and it's kind of hard to see reaching back, so this might not look as perfect as usual, but again, that's okay because everything doesn't have to be perfect. And I did forget to mention when we started this that if you have the ability to reduce your presser foot pressure, for example, ours is here, if you can raise it on your machine, it really helps this to move more smoothly because it's not pushing down as hard on all the layers. That one I went in kind of far, so I'm not going to do the turn on that corner. And again, don't forget to kind of tug on your tie so it doesn't get bunched up underneath. And the slower you sew over those ties, the less they will bunch up on you. And then I do like to trim these before I get back here so I don't have a big bird's nest at the end. So we're almost done. And see, I came a little too far. I like to get things adjusted for my foot gets down to where I can't get in there. That looks pretty good. In this corner, I might go just a hair in at an angle. And it should end up pretty even with where you started. And then I just go over the stitches, the beginning stitches a couple times, back stitch, and that's it. You're done. See, it's all on the binding and not on the vinyl. Let's see how I did. I did all the way around. It's great. And then all you have left to do is trim these little pieces here at the top. Okay, so this is, we just want to show you the end result here real quick. Here's the finished case. And on the inside, as you can see here, it's all caught on the binding. None of it strayed. The ties, again, I pulled in so they lay nice and straight. If you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments, or if you have any requests of other things that you like us to show. I do intend on making some more videos about construction of other parts of the cases. General, not case specific, but general case construction tips and tricks. I hope that you found this helpful, and again, if there's any questions, please leave them below. And thanks for watching.